Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Spring 2025 debate. My name is Hailey, this is Leah, and we are your co-executive directors of the Political Student Assembly. We are also joined by Veer, the president of the Trojan Debate Society, and of course, a special shout out to our co-host, the USC Political Union. The last time we were in this room, it was October, just 2 weeks away from electing the next president of the United States. Now, we're in very different moments, a new administration, a new Congress, and a wave of defining policy debates that will shape the direction of our country. And right here at USC, we have the opportunity to wrestle with those questions together, to bring student voices across the political spectrum into the same space for an honest, principled, and live debate. Our aim is to foster an environment where diverse perspectives are not only shared, but respected and thoughtfully considered. That being said, remember that the USC Political Student Assembly and the USC Political Union maintain a neutral stance regarding the views expressed here tonight. Our role is to facilitate a fair and balanced discussion, ensuring that every voice is heard and that discriminatory remarks of any kind are not tolerated. Thank you all for being here and for your commitment to constructive dialogue. Let's approach tonight's debate with a spirit of mutual respect and a shared dedication to making a positive impact on our campus and beyond.
Now, before we get started, a quick note on something new this year. Instead of a fourth topic, we are doing something different. After rebuttals, each debater will get one live question from us, the moderators, pulled straight from your student submissions. These are the questions you all sent in when we asked for topic 4 suggestions. And guess what? Most of them were already about the 3 topics that we had already picked. So rather than adding a whole new round, we are bringing those questions directly to the stage. Think of it as crossfire. Powered by you, the audience. With that, Veer will explain the ground rules for tonight's debate.
Tonight's debate will cover 3 topics. The structure for each topic will be as follows. We'll start with 3 minutes for each debater's opening statement, then 5 minutes for cross-debate, where debaters can engage directly with each other. Then 3 minutes for a rebuttal from each debater, 1 minute for a moderated question response for each debater, 2-minute crossfire on that question, and then 2 minutes for each debater's closing statement. We ask that all debaters strictly adhere to the time limits for each segment. To ensure fairness, the moderators will enforce these limits throughout the debate. You will hear a gavel once when you have 10 seconds remaining, like so, and we will gavel repeatedly when your time is up. A few important ground rules. No crosstalk. Please wait your turn to speak and respect one another's time. Interruptions or attempts to speak over others will result in a time penalty, with the time deducted from your own speaking opportunity. The moderators have full discretion to manage the debate and enforce the rules as necessary, including time limits. Now, to our audience, we expect the same level of respect from you as we do from our debaters. While expressions of support, such as snapping or clicking, are allowed, please refrain from applause, cheering, or jeering until the end of each round to maintain a respectful and focused environment. For closing remarks, a gavel will sound once when there are 15 seconds remaining. And with that, thank you and good luck to our debaters.
If our debaters could please come to the podium. For our first topic on immigration, please welcome on your right, DC, who will be debating for the Republicans, and on your left, Sara, Xiao, Stienecker, who will be debating for the Democrats. In recent years, immigration policy in the U.S. has reflected competing visions of enforcement. Some administrations have emphasized decentralized discretion and humanitarian relief, while others have prioritized centralized control, deterrence, and strict federal oversight. Under President Biden, immigration policy was guided by DHS 2021's enforcement memo, which limited deportations to 3 categories: national security threats, recent border crossers, and individuals with serious criminal convictions. Conversely, the Trump administration's approach to immigration has marked a cultural shift, issuing executive orders to restart border wall construction, ramping up ICE and CBP enforcement raids, and threatening legal action against sanctuary jurisdictions like Philadelphia and Boston that declined to comply with federal immigration detainer requests. These challenges reflect a significant reallocation of federal attention and resources towards immigration enforcement. That being said, our question is, do President Trump's new policies and shift in approach make the immigration system more effective or more harmful? We'll begin with Republicans.
So illegal immigration is so out of hand that even Kamala stopped pretending to be a border czar. And while the vice president's still finding the root causes, we're out here defending the actual roots of one republic, law, order, and justice. Trump's policies are rooted in absolute fairness in order to protect the sanctity of the legal status of citizenship in this country. For when Laken Riley's due process, where was Laken Riley's due process when she was murdered for no reason by an illegal alien? Where was Jocelyn Nungare's due process when she was raped and killed as a 12-year-old by an illegal alien? But Abrego Garcia gets more of a fight for his rights than the actual citizens of this country, where his rights are being enforced and people are going after them, but not for these people. It doesn't make any sense. And that's the first point. These immigration policies have to exist. For example, a speed limit is just a sign that we all agree to look at and say that we're going to make sure that we go under the speed limit. But why do we do that? Because we know that there's actual enforcement behind it, that there's cops that will come out and arrest you for breaking the speed limit, that there's consequences to lives that happen if you break the rules. But if we take this position on illegal immigration, that we will do absolutely nothing about it, and in fact, we will actually incentivize these people to come into our country when they have no legal status, then A, it disincentivizes legal immigration for people to go through the process properly, and B, we're bringing in people that we don't actually intend to bring, which increases the rate of likelihood of criminal actions against actual citizens. The other thing is that, for example, 294 individuals on the terrorist watch list were literally apprehended between ports of entry on the southern border since 2021, according to the CBP. And then on top of that, the CBP also arrested 35,433 illegal aliens with prior criminal convictions, including 598 known gang members. On top of that, it's also important to remember that rule of law and economic equity are really important. Just societies enforce the laws equally and protect their own citizens from wage suppression and resource displacement, which is why we also need these immigration policies, because undocumented workers are 5% of the US labor force, but are 30% of workers in certain low-wage sectors. And this is a problem because when Americans are literally unemployed and are unable to get the kinds of jobs that have a low barrier to entry, it's because these jobs are literally being taken away, which is also a massive problem. And then finally, we need unchecked illegal immigration can literally overwhelm cities, especially in education, housing, and healthcare. And this is absolutely terrible because, for example, schools with high foreign-born populations have overcrowding, increased student-teacher ratios, and shortage of actual bilingual ESL instructors, which means that even when we're bringing these people in, we're not able to provide them the kinds of resources that they actually should have. So why would we be focusing on people coming in from another country illegally when we have our own citizens to take care of, and the health and wealth of our nation focuses on our citizens, so we need to prioritize them and not the illegal immigrants. Thank you.
Dems, your response?
Hi, everybody. So we can all agree that America is built on immigration and that our current immigration system is dysfunctional. But Trump's policies are not fixing the system. He is demonizing immigrants and depriving people of due process. I, like so many other Americans, am here because my mother left everything behind to pursue a better life in this country. That pursuit is at the heart of what it means to be an American. But the Trump administration does not believe in this integral part of the American identity. So I ask you all, do you feel any safer? In the past 3 months, Trump has unleashed a terror campaign against immigrants. He's pumping the airwaves full of ads attempting to terrorize them. His government is questioning and detaining children, church attendants, and hospital patients. He's ignoring due process and sending protected individuals to foreign prisons without any checks and balances. So I ask you again, does that make you feel any safer? Deporting innocent individuals who are not committing crimes, individuals with protected status, and revoking legal status from hundreds of thousands of people doesn't make me feel any safer. It is a systemic effort to expunge immigrants from a country that is comprised of them. Trump's flagrant disregard for the law certainly didn't make Kilmar Abrego Garcia any safer. Garcia, a father from Maryland married to an American citizen, was illegally sent to a Salvadoran prison due to an administrative error. The Supreme Court ordered his return last week in a unanimous decision. but he's unable to come home to his family, his wife, and his daughter because the Salvadoran president refuses to return him and Trump refuses to do anything about it. How does that make any of us any safer? Hundreds of Venezuelan immigrants have also been sent to prisons in El Salvador. These men were never given a day in court, and many were sent there solely because of their tattoos. Trump has defied court orders and deprived people of due process. Does that make you feel any safer? Of course, there are ways to actually improve our immigration system and make Americans feel safe. The immigration bill put forth during President Biden's term, which was written by Republicans and Democrats, increased funding for immigration courts and expanded the bandwidth of the entire immigration system. This bill garnered broad bipartisan support to address a failing immigration system until Trump made a phone call and shut it down to score political points during the 2024 election. Does that make you feel any safer? Let me reiterate. Trump's broad painting of undocumented immigrants, immigrants with legal status, and even naturalized citizens as criminals harms them, harms us, and harms America. His dismantling of checks and balances and disregard for principles of justice in the immigration system do not improve the system. They make it inhumane and ineffective. So I ask you once again, do you feel any safer? Because I certainly don't.
Now we will enter 5 minutes of cross debate.
So I want to go ahead and just jump into this idea of job creation and immigrants are coming to steal your jobs. This is economically patently false. Multiple economists and reputable people who do research on economics for their full-time jobs have stated that people who are coming here into the country are not stealing jobs from people who are born in the United States. They are not a threat to U.S. workers. And to get a work visa to come into the United States, your employer has to demonstrate that there are no qualified U.S. citizens who can do your job. Furthermore, business leaders in the industries where undocumented immigrants are most prevalent to have jobs have stated that they would not be able to continue without the support of undocumented immigrants and their job and their labor. These are jobs that do not have a ton of people lining up to do them. There is not 100 people fighting for one spot. These are jobs that we need people in, and by cutting out a giant portion of the workforce, you're debilitating these industries.
Yeah, no, I totally understand your point. So I have like a three-tiered response. So first, if all the illegal immigrants are, for example, being employed in these like low-skilled jobs, then what kind of incentive does it provide for citizens who even want to seek those jobs? For example, if I'm wanting to get an entry-level job at a fast food restaurant, but I know that every single other person that works there is an illegal immigrant who is literally willing to accept lower pay that I would never accept, then there's no point in me even applying there, and I'm now cut out of an entire segment of the job market. So that's absolutely not fair, and that's not solvency. Second, the main problem with what you're talking about is that like illegal immigration, like according to the Economic Policy Institute, for example, wages have stagnated in low-skilled jobs for decades due to the fact that there's a labor oversupply from illegal immigrants, according to the EPI wage tracker in 2023. And then on top of that, the thing about like the point that you made that like illegal immigrants take the jobs that U.S. citizens don't want. This is not true in all sectors. And actually, the main problem, again, is that American citizens don't even know that these jobs are available to them because they're constantly being even cut out from the opportunity to have a fair shot at those jobs at a fair pay rate. And instead of incentivizing a fair pay rate, we're accepting lower pay from people who do not belong here.
Okay, so I would like to talk about this idea of a fair pay rate. I think it's really interesting that the party who is advocating for a $7.25 minimum wage is advocating for a fair pay rate. But to go back to that statement, undocumented immigrants make up 17% of the agriculture industry and 13% of the construction industry. Again, these are not jobs that native-born U.S. citizens cannot work. These jobs, they post available job postings and nobody shows up. There is a business owner who posted a job for U.S. citizens to work in agriculture work. Literally nobody showed up. And so he has to rely on immigrant labor to help him run his business. So therefore, there's not a surplus of people who are trying to work these jobs. And by alleging that, it's just false to what is happening in the economy. I want to go back to your comment about due process. Due process is a fundamental constitutional right that is not contingent on citizenship. Let me reiterate. The Fifth Amendment states that no person may be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. You'll note it does not say no citizens. This is not on an error of the founders. They make multiple allusions and references to citizenship in sections 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the Constitution. So this is not a failure on their part. They intended for every single person in the United States to have the right of due process. So by stripping people who are here as immigrants from their due process is unconstitutional.
Okay, so let's talk about like two really quick things, right? Because I think we have a couple of different values that are being weighed here. Because I would argue that a person's right to life matters a lot more than someone's right to due process, especially when American citizens' lives are literally being robbed for no reason other than administrative failure. That absolutely matters than somebody else's like due process rights. But then on top of that, second, let's talk about due processes, because we can absolutely acknowledge that there are probably some issues with due process, and they did talk about it being an administrative error. So we can say that those problems are true, but that doesn't mean that the solvency for that is to promote illegal immigration. The
Who's
word
promoting
illegal
that?
is literally
Who's promoting
in there.
illegal immigration?
By
Name one
allowing-
policy that incentivized illegal immigrants to come into the United States undocumented. There have been multiple efforts from administrations in the Biden administration, in the Obama administration, to increase pathways for legal citizenship. So standing here and saying that presidents from the Democratic Party are standing here incentivizing people to come here undocumented is patently false. So if you want to continue your argument, don't say that because it's a lie.
So I would say that it's true, because if there's no actual enforcement mechanism preventing people who illegally immigrate from like being deported, then that's a problem, right? I agree that like having more legal pathways to citizenship is a good thing, and it's also
And that's the conclusion of our cross debate. All right. Now, Republicans have 3 minutes to give your rebuttal.
Let's talk about a couple of different things here, because there's a theme of safety that keeps coming across again and again and again. So let's start with due process. The Democrats keep making this argument that because people's due process rights are being violated, and it is a fundamental aspect of the Constitution, that somehow has a lot more worth, and that we ought to take that into higher consideration than a legal citizen's right to be here and protecting the integrity of the citizenship process. But let's go back to the analogy that I literally gave about speed limits, right? If there's this posted speed limit sign and people know that that is not enforced because cops won't come after them and that no one will give them a ticket whenever they cross the speed limit, then who cares about what the speed limit is? We would have far more accidents and crashes all the time. It is the enforcement of said policies that allows the credibility of these laws to exist. If we're going to have legal immigration processes and pathways and incentivize that, which is a good thing, we cannot also screw over those efforts by enabling people who illegally come to this country to stay here and mess up the hard work that people who have legally immigrated here have done. We're removing those incentives. But then second of all, again, on the whole thing of due process, where was Laken Riley's due process when she was murdered? Or Jocelyn Nungre's due process when she was senselessly raped and killed? And why are we giving Abrego Garcia more of a right to due process than those two women that were senselessly murdered? It doesn't make any sense. Make it make sense. But then on top of that, let's talk about 3 with jobs, because the issue that the Democrats keep talking about of the fact that like illegal immigrants are taking up the jobs that Americans don't want, that is a consequence of allowing illegal immigrant labor to take up low-wage sectors. Because if we didn't allow them to do that, then industries would only be able to have citizens and people who are legally in this country apply to get those jobs, and market economics would work out the price wage in that. And then on top of that, the Democrats talk about how like we need undocumented immigrants in the agriculture industry and all of these other industries that are unsupported by citizens. And then she made a joke about the fact that like the national wage rate is $7.25. Well, even given the fact that like we have a low national wage rate, why would we let undocumented immigrants take up those jobs when, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, undocumented migrants are also 3 times more likely to use ERs as primary care due to a lack of insurance? insurance, which means not only are Americans getting robbed of jobs, not only do Americans have less of an opportunity to get low entry barrier jobs, but then on top of that, American taxpayer dollars are literally going to more inflated costs because these people can't get insurance. So first of all, we need to put the right to life above the right to due process, and we can agree that there's issues with due process of the system, but that doesn't mean we have to screw over American citizens. We can focus on fixing the economic industry without relying on illegal immigration, and we can protect the integrity of the laws of the United States by preventing illegal immigration.
Thank you. Democrats, your rebuttal?
So a lot of things were just said. So I'm going to clarify just by saying the fact that you think the $7.25 minimum wage is a joke says a lot about your party, but whatever. Let's go ahead and get started. So let's talk about this idea of undocumented immigrants using American tax dollars. That's patently false. In 40 states, undocumented immigrants pay higher tax rates than the top 1%. And a third of these taxes go to programs that they themselves can't even access, that go towards funding programs for American citizens like Social Security, like Medicare, like other things like food stamps and SNAP and EBT. So let's get started there. They're not taking American tax dollars, they're actively giving back to the US economy. Undocumented immigrants pay $96.7 billion in taxes annually. That's not an insignificant amount of money. So I would just like to say they're not taking the tax dollars of the United States. And let's get back to this issue on crime. There's this common narrative that undocumented immigrants increase crime. This is patently false. 19 different research reports have shown that undocumented immigrants and naturalized citizens and people who are here legally, the higher the proportion of those groups are in a community, there has been either no effect or a negative effect on the violent and property crime rates. So it's patently false to say that undocumented immigrants increase crime. And actually, according to Cato Institute, which is a very prominent right-wing think tank, they found that undocumented immigrants are 26% less likely to be convicted of violent crimes in Texas. So I would just like to say this allegation that undocumented immigrants are committing crimes at higher rates than native-born citizens is patently unfalse. Now, I want to get back to this point of due process, because I think what we're talking about, we need to address it. What happened to Laken Riley was a tragedy, and I'm not going to stand here and defend what happened to her. It is a tragedy, and my heart goes out to her friends and family, and I'm standing here as a completely genuine statement. However, I will not stand here and say that because of one person doing something, we need to demonize an entire group of people based on their immigration status. Because being part of a group where one singular member goes and does something does not mean that you as a person are more predisposed to commit crime. As I've said before, people who are here undocumented, people who are here as legal immigrants commit crimes at far lower rates than native-born US citizens. So to stand here and say, where was her due process? That is a crime, and I understand that what happened to her is a tragedy. But that does not mean we can turn around and strip due process, constitutional rights for an entire group of people because one person did something. And also, let me say, the person people in the Republican Party keep using Laken Riley's death as a political tool when her father herself has asked people to stop doing so. So I don't think we should be using her death as a political tool to gain points for immigration from the Republican side.
So before Veer asks the moderated question, I'll just remind you guys of the format. Starting with GOP, you will each get 1 minute to respond before we enter 2 minutes of crossfire.
Cool. So this question is for both of you guys. It'll start with the GOP. Many members of the audience have expressed sentiments about those oft forgotten by the immigration system, those immigrants currently waiting for their legal court date. Both sides have extensively discussed due process, or the lack thereof, and whether that is justified. But independent of whether we have an administration that prioritizes due process for undocumented immigrants, there are millions of immigrants, including legal asylum seekers, living in uncertainty while waiting for their chance at legal status in a backlogged immigration court system. In whatever immigration approach we decide to take, how should we ensure fairness for these immigrants?
Yes, so I think that we do need to incentivize policies that expedite the pathway to legal citizenship, and I think that we need to find an effective way with a proposal in a bill that does so, where we're able to expedite legal citizenship without creating an over-influx and overwhelm of people coming into the United States. The main second issue is that while we should prioritize and promote legal immigration and focus on making sure that our pathways are a lot more secure for people to come into this country legally, we also have to focus on the problems that are currently affecting American citizens. There is so much unemployment in this country. There is so much negative crimes that need to be solved and handled. We have so many major issues that we need to tackle economically, socially, and politically that honestly, if we want to create an environment for these immigrants to have a safer space, we should do that by fixing our own country and making it safe for our own citizens first as a prerequisite so that when immigrants do come into this country in their process that they have a better life here like they expect.
Right. Dems, your statement?
So I would like to say the Biden administration was very for increasing ways for people to come into this country legally. The people who are currently on parole, and a lot of those people, unfortunately, this week have had their parole status revoked by the Trump administration, enter the country using a program called CBP-1. If you're unfamiliar with what CBP-1 is, it was a program that you can download on your smartphone device to schedule an appointment with immigration officials once you arrived in the United States. People waited months to get these appointments, and once they had an appointment, they were allowed to enter in the country on a parole status pending further immigration policies. 936,000 people used CBP-1 to legally enter the country under parole, and the Trump administration has since rebranded the CBP-1 app into CBP Home and sent notifications to many of these individuals saying that their parole has been revoked. And so the Trump administration is actively abandoning the people who have chosen to come here through legal measures. And so I think it's ironic that you're saying you're trying to incentivize people, but you're actively taking away the methods they used to come here.
Thank you. Now we'll enter 2 minutes of crossfire.
Would you like to start with the first question?
You can go ahead.
Perfect. Okay, so you made this very interesting point where you're talking about how the Trump administration is basically taking away the pathways that people do have to legal citizenship through removing an app. But I have to ask, why is it a priority for us to promote illegal immigrants to come into this country through more different processes?
So the whole point of the app is that they're immigrating legally. That's how people legally immigrate, is by notifying immigration officials and meeting with immigration officials. So by saying this app that promotes legal immigration is incentivizing illegal immigration makes no sense, because this app was allowing people to come into this country legally under parole status, while the immigration officials in the United States, who are already overworked, are adjudicating their cases. So by getting rid of this pathway to legal citizenship, you're therefore forcing all of those people who were here legally to leave the country even though they went through the right channels. So that is de-incentivizing legal immigration by getting rid of avenues like that.
Well, I would say two things, and I should have clarified on my question. But you talked about how the staff who are working at these legal centers were overwhelmed in adjudicating these cases, right?
Yes.
Right, so if they're overwhelmed in adjudicating these cases, then even by taking in applications that would just expedite the process, how would we know that we're making comprehensively thorough, good decisions on who's coming into this country if people are overworked? Wouldn't we want to send them back and have them come back later when we are able to have a system that is able to comprehensively and effectively solve for immigration without letting people who are dangerous into the country?
So you know how we decrease the workload is passing the bipartisan border bill that was proposed under Biden, because that provided more funding for the immigration system and increasing the capacity. But because Trump decided to score political points in the 24 election instead of fixing the immigration system, they are now backlogged, and that bill would have solved that.
Thank you. Now we'll have the closing statement.
Who's first?
Republicans.
Wait, I thought I was. Don't I go first? Because she went first.
You spoke first at the last moderated question. You were the last speaker.
She spoke first for the last moderated question.
You were the last one that spoke during the moderated question. Yeah.
At the end of the day, we have to protect the integrity of the laws of the United States. And we can't do that if we're promoting illegal immigrants coming into our country and messing up the ability for people to legally come here. Even if there are proposals in the past that would have provided an avenue for incentivizing legal immigration, the fact that those laws have not passed means that we need to iterate on those solutions to come up with a better one, not blame the fact that stopping like illegal immigration from happening in the first place is a bad thing. We do have to focus on solvency, but we cannot do that by violating the laws of United States citizens. And yes, there are single case incidents like Laken Riley and Jocelyn Nungre, and the idea that the Democrats make that it's just a few bad apples is not true, because it sets a precedent where people can come into this country illegally and harm our own citizens. And the idea is what's more terrifying than the actual individual, because once the precedent has been set, the precedent has been set, and that's a very dangerous one to be set, and we need to think about that as citizens if we want that in this country. And finally, we have to focus on the economic implications of letting all of these people into the country when we have yet to finish fixing our own problems. If people are trying to immigrate here for a better life, to have better economic opportunity, how are we going to provide that to them when we're not able to fix the major domestic issues in our country? It's the same issue all over again, because these people are coming into our country and living worse lives. So we need to focus on fixing the immigration system to make pathways more legal, for sure. That is absolutely true. But on top of that, we need to prioritize protecting our domestic interests and ensuring that our citizens are taken care of, so that when people do come into this country, they're not coming into a country where the systems are failing them, and the systems are failing our own citizens. So we need to prioritize that first.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've heard a lot today. So I want to just take a minute to talk about some of the highlights that we've heard today. Let me be clear. Nobody here is promoting people immigrating to the United States illegally. We are simply asking for more methods for legal immigration and the humane treatment of people who are in the United States. Existing as an undocumented individual is not by itself a crime in the United States. It is a misdemeanor to cross the border undocumented. However, existing in the United States as an undocumented individual breaks no federal laws. Let me be very clear about that. Now let's talk about, you said violating the laws of the United States. You know what's also a law of the United States? Due process, free speech, things that the Trump administration is actively utilizing to weaponize against people who are here either undocumented or legally. The Trump administration has illegally revoked the visas of people here based on what they've said, the content of their speech. That is illegal based on the United States Constitution, which I would argue is a pretty legal document. Okay, so let's go ahead and start there. That is fundamentally an illegal act. Furthermore, this argument about immigrants hurting the economy. Immigrants do not hurt the economy. They contribute billions and billions of dollars of tax revenue into this country. They work jobs. They are contributing to the U.S. economy. And the U.S. economy has problems, but not because of immigrants and undocumented immigrants. Let me be very clear about that. And furthermore, I would just like to say it is really disheartening to hear such rhetoric about illegal immigrants and undocumented immigrants when the Trump administration has made it very clear that they are trying to revoke all avenues for people coming into this country, not just legally, not just illegally. By saying that you want to incentivize legal immigration, that's great to hear you say that, but your administration is not backing that up with data and policies. They're actively removing ways for people to be in this country legally, to come to this country legally, but you are here saying that you want to incentivize that. But how are you doing that when the Trump administration is revoking dozens of student visas, deporting people with no due process to foreign jails, which is unconstitutional? How is that the party of law? How is that obeying the laws of the United States?
Thank you. Let's give a round of applause for DC and Sara for opening up our debate.
All right. Round two debaters, please take the stage. Round two debaters, please take the stage. Okay. Now for our second topic on tariffs and the economy. Please welcome on your right, Ben Shaman, who will be debating for the Republicans. And on your left, Ken Leonard Oparaji, who will be debating for the Democrats. Following his election victory, President Trump implemented a new round of tariffs in early 2025, aiming to bolster domestic industries and address trade imbalances. On April 2nd, a 10% baseline tariff was imposed on imports from all countries, with higher reciprocal tariffs being imposed on countries the U.S. considers to be bad trade actors, such as China, whose effective tariff rate is now 54%. These tariffs represent a significant shift in America's approach to international trade. The administration and supporters argue these tariffs will effectively protect key U.S. industries from unfair competition, strengthen national security by reducing dependence on foreign supply chains, especially from China, and boost domestic production and employment. However, critics assert these tariffs will harm relationships with important allies such as Canada, increase production costs for U.S. businesses relying on imported materials, raise consumer prices, and prompt retaliatory tariffs. In light of these arguments, our question is, do President Trump's tariffs ultimately strengthen or undermine America's economy and geopolitical standing? And Democrats, we'll start with you.
Okay. Well, it's good to see you guys. I can't really see you guys, but I'm sure you're there. But it's time to talk about something more serious. As wages continue to stagnate for working Americans, inflation has gone up dramatically. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, the cost of living has gone up by over 20%. This means that for a $300 grocery bill from February 2020, you'd pay nearly $400 today. As young professionals enter the workforce and work to purchase their first home, we have a golden opportunity to raise wages and ensure a stable job and housing market and economy for everyone. Instead, the Trump administration has focused on economic retribution against our allies and countries abroad at the peril of our fellow Americans. On April 2nd, the Trump administration announced Liberation Day, slapping a slew of taxes on everyday items for American workers and consumers. What does this mean, you ask? This means higher prices for future homes because they source Canadian lumber. This means higher prices on your Dulce and Starbucks because they source Japanese matcha powder and foreign coffee beans. This means higher prices on your Cava and Chipotle because they source Mexican avocados. These tariffs will even affect how we use our free time, affecting Nintendo Switch prices and other video game devices, as well as our relations with China when it comes to the movie industry. Economists estimate that an average household will spend nearly $5,000 more due to Trump's tariffs, disproportionately impacting the very voters Trump won the election with and Republicans claim to represent. Even more damaging is his constant reversal on his tariff stances, which have dissuaded foreign investment in American industries and forced countries to unite against our trade policies. China, Japan, and South Korea, countries with conflicts longer than the existence of the United States, are now becoming more economically aligned. The European Union has instituted 25% reciprocal tariffs, damaging our manufacturing and agricultural industries as our exports to European countries drop. This isn't even to mention the over 125% tariff China has implemented on all its American imports. And even with the 90-day pause on select tariffs and a flat 10% tariff on all nations, foreign countries and Americans here now cannot trust the Trump administration and its economic proposals. The result will be alone in this world, separated from the global market and engulfed by a new Chinese century, will be subjugated to rising prices and permanently paralyzed by higher inflation as imports become more expensive and companies rush to make more money off the backs of Americans by price gouging their products. We'll be watching as our bank accounts continue to shrink while our administration and Republican congressional representatives profit off of our now failing economy. So really, the question becomes, was it all worth it?
Republicans, you're opening.
Just want to say hi to everyone. I know a lot of you in the crowd, like he mentioned, it's kind of hard to see, but just wanted to say hi. I'm Ben, I'm from the Bay Area, and I'm a first-generation college student. Our thesis is clear. The new Republican Party believes the status quo trade policy is fundamentally broken because it sees the American people as consumers and not what we truly are, producers and innovators. Strategic protectionism, highlighted by tariffs, is not a retreat into the shadows of isolationism. It's about embracing pragmatism. For 40 years, Washington chose ideological dogma and the interests of multinational corporations on Wall Street over good jobs and the dignity of our workers. And what did it get us? us: dependence on foreign supply chains and record inequality, the two greatest threats to our nation today. On manufacturing, we were told we could innovate at home and outsource manufacturing abroad. And what has happened? We've lost over 5 million manufacturing jobs and decimated communities in the American heartland. This is mission critical. As McKinsey notes, manufacturing drives 70% of private R&D in the United States. When we send production overseas, we don't just lose jobs here, but we also lose the ecosystems that support innovation. A 2023 study by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute tracked 64 key technologies in fields like energy, defense, biotech, and AI. In 2007, the US led in 60 of these technologies. Today, our lead has shrunk to 7. While Wall Street has thrived, our middle class, the strength of this nation, has been left to decay. For the first time in this country's history, the top 1% holds more wealth than the entire middle class combined. When my parents fled the Soviet Union in 1989, the middle class controlled twice as much wealth as the top 1%. And inequality is only increasing because we don't protect our workers on the global stage. A study from UC Berkeley found that from 2019 to 2022, wages rose 4.2% overall, but real income from the bottom 99% grew by just 1%. That means that the top 1% took 81% of total wage gains. So I ask you all, who is the status quo economy working for? And we've already seen that a new path works. From 2001 to 2016, real median household income grew by an average of 0.3%. During the first Trump administration, wages grew by 10.5% in 3 years. That is 10 times faster than the average before. Now, I admit, the great American onshoring will take time, but the Democrats have no solution. We had 4 years of their leadership. Food prices rose by 25%, housing prices surged 60%, and global conflicts erupted. So I leave you with this quote from Nancy Pelosi. It is up to us to set down a marker. How far does China have to go? How much more repression? How big a trade deficit and a loss of jobs for the American worker before we say enough is enough?
Thank you. Okay, now 5 minutes of cross debate.
Okay, so I just want to ask, all right, because the Trump administration has offered conflicting stances on how they view tariffs, okay? So I'm asking you really personally. Are tariffs a negotiating tactic, or are they a permanent fixture of our economy now?
I think the premise of the question is actually incorrect. The Trump administration has been very clear on what their policy. I mean, it may be unclear for the Democrat Party and the news media that they get it from, but it's very clear to us.
Who's us?
Who's us? The people that voted for Trump, the 51% of Americans, the majority of Americans who voted for Trump, the reason why he's the president of the United States. But let me answer the question. The economic policy of the Trump administration is super simple. First step is the IEEPA, which is 20% tariffs on China for fentanyl. Remember, the Chinese are producing the byproducts that are killing American citizens. So there's a 20% tariff there. The second tariff. And then Trump said that any country that does not increase tariffs on us is going to be rewarded. So he said that we have 90 days to renegotiate trade deals. At that point, tariffs are both inherently good because they protect industries in America, but they're also good because they allow America to renegotiate. Remember, the problem is not only tariffs. A lot of these countries have non-tariff barriers that are also the problem. So it's super simple to be like, oh, tariffs is like really big word. It's super scary. But the problem is that the international trading system is inherently unfair, and that's the whole point. Now, I want to ask you a question. Talking about economics, you say that the economists are believing that it's going to increase prices for American producers.
Yes.
Are these the same economists that said Bidenomics would work?
No, they're not. Okay.
These are brand new economists?
No, these are brand new economists.
These are brand new
yes,
economists?
Yes,
I really don't believe that. I think
okay,
that these
okay, let's talk about inflation under the Biden administration, okay? So due to COVID, supply chains were damaged. And because we were coming out of COVID, demand is up, which means that prices for everyday goods will also increase. Now, what we're seeing...
That's why inflation happened?
Yes.
That is why inflation happened?
Yes.
Or was it because the Biden administration literally printed trillions of dollars that the American economy does not have?
Hey,
Inflation,
in the audience.
inflation is literally an economic phenomenon produced by the Fed. It is not an economic policy because Americans want to buy goods. Now, I want to push back on what you said about these economists. Why, when these economists have been wrong for 40 years, why do you think we should trust them now?
That's a good question. Honestly, personally, I trust them more than the Trump administration. And
But
a
why?
majority of Americans would agree. Currently, Trump is underwater when it comes to his economic policies. He's underwater when it comes to tariffs. He's underwater when it
On
comes
what
to
basis?
inflation.
On what basis?
What do you mean on what basis?
Like, what is your metric of saying that he's underwater?
Polling?
What polling?
What do you mean, what polling?
What? I'm asking you. Which
Hold on,
poll?
okay, hold on. Okay.
I'm asking you which polling, because I saw a poll.
We can talk about-
by
we can talk
YouGov
about
that
CBS,
says
we can
that
talk
Trump
about
is
YouGov.
at 53% right now.
Yeah,
That's
Trump
the
is
poll
not-
that I see.
That's
So
probably-
name one. Name the poll. What poll says that he's underwater? Name
We
it.
got YouGov, we got Gallup.
YouGov
we
is
got,
the one that
you got
I just
CBS.
mentioned.
That is from probably the first month of his administration.
it's
and that
released
has
from
gone
last
down.
week.
That has gone from last week?
Yes,
Before?
yes.
That was, I've seen that one. That was before Liberation Day. That's gone down since then. But let's talk
Liberation
about,
Day was
we can,
2 weeks
hold on.
ago.
We can talk about polling. 2 weeks
Liberation
ago,
Day is
that's
April
2 weeks ago
2nd.
is pre-Liberation Day.
April 2nd?
2 weeks, today is what?
So the poll is a week ago.
What is today? Today's the 15th?
The poll is a week
2 weeks ago is April 1st. Liberation Day was April 2nd. That is before Liberation Day. Now, let's talk about more polling here.
The poll is
We
from
can
last
talk about
week.
manufacturing here. We can talk about manufacturing here, okay? For people in the audience, many of you do not want to work in manufacturing facilities. Now, there's no problem with manufacturing
Can you
facilities.
define a manufacturing job?
I'm sorry?
Can you define a manufacturing job?
I mean, we can talk about making computers,
like
we can
what
talk
do you-
about making cars, we can talk about a lot of different things here. But hold on, let me finish. 80% of Americans see the value in these manufacturing jobs. I do too. Now, you ask those same Americans, 80% of them think their lives would not be better if they worked in a manufacturing job. Now, for our economy, we have to work out this balance. And the Trump administration has not done a very good job of that.
Thank you. And now moving to a rebuttal from Dems.
So we're out here talking about manufacturing, the importance of manufacturing. And I was making a little bit of a point when it comes to balancing the importance of people who see the value in manufacturing but don't want to work these jobs. So let's talk about manufacturing and what we can do in order to promote manufacturing in our wonderful American economy. So we had something called the CHIPS and Science Act, which was passed under the Biden administration, which increased manufacturing spending. Now, I noticed that he was talking about Biden's economic policies, flooding money into this economy. But personally speaking, I would like to see manufacturing spending increase, which happened with the CHIPS and Science Act, which happened with the Inflation Reduction Act, which reduced inflation, believe it or not. And it happened with the American Rescue Plan that was passed right after he got inaugurated. So, and what we're seeing right now under the Trump administration is that manufacturing spending is going down. Why is it going down, you ask? Because who would trust a country who has consistently gone back and forth on whether or not they would institute tariffs, which would damage their own manufacturing industries when we're talking about what they're using for raw products? We saw this happen under the Trump administration. He instituted steel tariffs on other countries. And you know what happened? 75,000 jobs were lost in Michigan, and then he lost Michigan in the 2020 election. So what do we see here when it comes to tariffs? We see that Trump, his administration, does not know how to effectively use these tariffs when it comes to building manufacturing. It's as simple as that.
Now for a rebuttal from GOP.
I think the debate is over when he says that the Inflation Reduction Act decreased inflation. Every single person in this room knows that after the IRA was passed, America saw levels of inflation that it has never seen before. Then he talks about the CHIPS Act. I ask you, what has the CHIPS Act actually done? The result, 8 EV chargers across the country. All this money that was spent didn't actually produce anything. Why? Because the government does not create jobs. The way we create jobs is to let the free market work. The problem is the free market is constantly being undermined when China subsidizes electrical prices for its steel manufacturers. It is consistently being undermined when VAT taxes are being rebated by Germany. It is consistently being undermined when Mexico undermines its labor prices so that they are able to pay for prices under what we would do in America. On every single front, the Biden administration and Democrats have provided no solution. He says that the Trump administration wasn't able to create economic generation through the first tariffs. But that is literally not true. We saw that for 16 years, the average wage growth in this country was 0.3%. In just 3 years by President Trump, it increased by 10.5%. That is actual statistics that show that these economic policies work. Now, I want to talk about this issue about our global standing. Who was president when Ukraine was invaded by Putin? Who was president when NAFTA was decided that it was a good idea? Who was president when America joined the WTO? He says that America was more respected on the world stage, but what I think he really means is that America was being ripped off on the world stage. It is really easy to say that we shouldn't protect American workers when you consistently lose elections. What Trump is trying to do is saying that we need to restructure the global trading system. Yes, it may take time. Yes, it may harm some people in the short term. But the issue is that when you want to generate jobs, you have to make sure that people are playing by the rules, that we actually are able to create a cohesive system. Also, this whole thing about economists is super funny. When these same economists said that Bidenomics was not going to increase inflation, what you saw for the past 4 years was food prices increased by 25%, housing prices increased by 60%. At the end of the day, it's really simple. Americans are not consumers. We did not become the greatest country in the world because our tennis shoes were cheaper. We became the greatest country in the world because we made the things that made this country go round. I think that the difference is super clear.
Okay. So,
Thank you.
what I will say...
Wait.
Okay. Sorry. My apologies.
We're entering the moderated question section.
All right, so to preface again, this question is for both debaters, but we're going to start with a Democrat response. So there's been scintillating debate about domestic economic policy and impacts, but many audience members are curious about how tariffs impact our foreign relations. It is undoubted that the impact of American tariff policies emanate far beyond our borders, and that these ripples can eventually come back to us. Whether it be their potential usefulness in checking back China, a country labeled bipartisanly as an existential threat, or their risk in alienating our close allies in Europe. So our question is, how should the United States implement America First policies while also navigating international relations?
That's a great question, whoever submitted that. I want to say that I think tariffs can be an effective tool when used very sparingly. So we have for the CHIPS Act, for example, Biden instituted a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, which have allowed Ford, General Motors to increase their amount of electric vehicles. But the difference here is that these were a very specific, narrow tariffs that were instituted on a particular industry, as opposed to Trump's chaotic sales tax. Additionally, I mentioned that we were talking about relations, global relations, when it comes to China, when it comes to other countries around the world. For Hollywood, for example, a lot of movies that are produced here get shown in Hollywood, get shown in China. And because of Trump's tariffs, because of his damaging relations with China, they're not showing those movies anymore. So I think it's important to understand, and it's important to consider who is really benefiting on the global stage when it comes to tariffs from Trump administration. It's definitely not us.
Thank you.
If your argument is that 5 million manufacturing jobs were lost And the problem is that we cannot show movies in China. I am sorry, that is the weakest argument I have ever heard. The reason that we are doing tariffs is to protect manufacturing jobs across the country. We are protecting industries that have destroyed and decimated the middle of America. This is not a joke that we can talk about movies. We are talking about people who have seen their communities afflicted by alcoholism, by depression, by suicide rates. We have seen America, its greatest cities like Detroit, actually falter. And if you're talking about movies, I am sorry. This is not the place and time. Now onto the global stage. I made in my speech a couple key points. Who was president when Ukraine was invaded by Putin? Who was president when NAFTA was signed? Who was president when China was allowed to join the WTO? Our allies do not respect a weak America. All of these global decisions were bad.
Okay, we're going to move to 2 minutes of crossfire.
So I want to say that I think when we're referring to relations with Ukraine and the other things that he's bringing up, they have nothing to do with tariffs.
Why?
I'm very sorry.
Why?
They have nothing.
Why?
His Ukraine and Russia, that has nothing to do.
Yeah.
That has.
Can I? Oh yeah. I want to make another point on
Okay.
this. Trump, when he implemented tariffs and sanctions on Russia, Europe, he told Europe, do not buy any gas and oil from Russia. When Biden became president, he reversed these decisions, and Europe bought more oil and gas from Russia than it gave aid to Ukraine. So, my question is this. On a global stage, when we're saying, is America strong or weak? At that point, when these allies that are supposed to be our allies, they're not even listening to what the President of the United States says, how do you say that tariffs have nothing to do with like international policy? Like, it doesn't make sense.
Okay. So we talk about tariffs will supposedly weaken China relative to the United States, which is factually not true. China has already started building trade relations with Europe, with Southeast Asia, and other countries, leaving the United States behind at the expense of our relations with other countries. And, you know, we're asking, you know, why are other countries not listening to the Trump administration? They are. They just don't want to. They are. They just do not want to work with us because of their tariffs, because of our tariffs that are damaging our relations with other countries.
2 quick responses. First, Trump had 75 countries saying that they're willing to negotiate on deals.
Who?
That did not happen. Japan is coming to the White House next week. South Korea is coming to the White House, I think, tomorrow. So these are, and the EU even said that they're not going to respond to tariffs right now. So we're seeing that countries are coming to the negotiating table. The second thing I just want to say is that the point that I made is that they were not listening to the Democrats. They are listening to the Russians.
Okay, we're going to move to a closing statement from Dems.
Thank you very much. So, unfortunately, the Trump administration has now signed a death warrant for the American economy with their new sales tax and constant indecisiveness. While most of these effects will not be felt for a few months, the damage has already been done to Americans and our future plans. Unemployment and inflation will rise while our standard of living will fall. We are likely headed to a recession because of it. Abroad, our allies are abandoning us at rapid pace, and China continues to grow its economic influence across the world. As this continues, we will be left behind in this global market that Trump has restructured at the United States' detriment, all because of his willingness to bankrupt this country for himself and his insiders. Now, let's talk a little more personal. For those who feel hopeless in this economy, you are not alone. For those of you who oppose Trump's economic plans, you are in the majority of Americans. For those of you who oppose the administration's beliefs on foreign trade, you are in the majority of Americans. For those of you who blame Trump for the current state of America, you are in the majority of Americans, not the minority. Discontent is growing in America, and in the 2026 midterms, you have the power to stop this madness. Because Congress can stop Trump's tariffs, and we currently claim its congressional authority. However, it requires an unprecedented and dominant midterm performance for Democrats to overcome the weak Republican congressional representatives who cower in the face of danger and are afraid to show their faces in their districts and oppose this terrible sales tax on this country. Under this administration, this country will rise or fall depending on how dissatisfied we are with our leadership destroying our economic prosperity. And right now, our country needs all the help it can get. Stay informed, aware, and safe. Your friends, family, and community and this country are counting on you. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll do a closing statement from GOP. 2 minutes.
Our thesis is clear. The Republican Party believes that the American people are producers first and consumers second. That is the problem of today's debate. He says that that China and the Europeans are going to become this new economy that is going to reverse all of America, the profits from America. Remember, the Americans consume $20 trillion every single year. China is second at $10 trillion. So explain to me where China is going to be able to make up these $10 trillion. We are the United States of America. I think we forget that we have leverage to be able to decide what trade deals we want, what kind of manufacturing base we want, and what kind of economy we want. Remember, in the past 4 years, we saw what the Biden administration did. They did 8 EV chargers. They did 25% increases in food costs. They did 60% increases in the housing costs. I think it's time to take a different route that caused 10.3% increase in wages in just 3 years, 10 times more than the previous 16 years. I know that it's Trump, and you guys hate Trump, and because it's his policy, you don't want to consider it. But you have to realize that the American economy for 40 years has been failing. These countries have been cheating the American worker. It is time to return dignity back to our workers. It's time to say that what America has been doing, this path of free trade, has not been working because it's not fair trade. We have to be able to have deals that prioritize our workers, that prioritize our communities, that raise wages for not only the rich, but raise wages for everyone. The bottom 99% cannot be forgotten no longer. Remember, the top 1% did not always own more wealth than the middle class. It happened directly when we went down this path of 40 years of free trade.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, guys. Let's give a round of applause for Ben and Ken Leonard. Great job. Great job.
If our last debaters of the night can take the stage, we can start on our third topic. For our third topic on DOGE, please welcome on your right, Dakota Dreemeyer, who will be debating for the Republicans, and on your left, River Mensch, who will be debating for the Democrats. Recently, the size, scope, and influence of the federal bureaucracy, often called the fourth branch of government, has increasingly become subjects of debate. Responding to concerns about bureaucratic inefficiency, numerous executive orders have been introduced to streamline government functions, including the establishment of the Department of Government Efficiency, otherwise known as DOGE. Since its creation, DOGE has initiated sweeping reforms across agencies, proposing the elimination of the Department of Education, phasing out DEI programs, consolidating USED functions, closing Social Security offices, and fast-tracking the Department of Transportation procedures. Supporters of DOGE argue that these reforms have successfully increased transparency and accountability while cutting costs. Critics, however, caution that DOGE's centralization efforts may inadvertently weaken necessary regulatory oversight, diminish agency expertise, and concentrate excessive power within fewer hands. Given these perspectives, our final question of the night is, do DOGE's goals and reforms serve the national interest, and is the department effectively achieving them? Republicans, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much. To PSA, to PU, for everyone for hosting this. It's always great to be able to come here and share our perspectives and have them heard in an environment. Before I begin tonight, I have to draw some light to the lapel that I'm wearing. There are still 24 hostages remaining in Gaza that are alive. So I feel like we need to acknowledge that and make that very clear. That's not a partisan issue, that's a moral one. It's one that we are, hopefully many of us in this room are fighting for to end. Now to get on to DOGE, I had a shirt tonight that didn't come up that didn't end up showing up that was supposed to be delivered by the United States Postal Service. And it really sums up the mantra of what I think DOGE is doing. It stands, Democrats officially getting exposed. Thank you. For far too long, partisan politics has put aside any sort of government efficiency. The Democrats continue to want to grow the size of the federal government at the expense of you, the American taxpayers. And I don't think it's irony that we're meeting here on the day in which we are all required to have our taxes finished by. And this harms everyone in this room when we misappropriate and misuse our tax dollars. We are a nation that is $35 trillion in debt. And DOGE is essentially working to make sure that we can mitigate that we can increase the federal deficit to $1 trillion from the $2 trillion that it currently is that we were gifted from the Biden administration. And it starts there. Since DOGE's inception, it has found ridiculous spending on behalf of the federal government and things like USAID and inefficiencies that were found in the Department of Education, just to name a few. And also to look at it, at one point we were spending $60 million a year on contraceptives spread throughout the world. We were spending money to form a Sesame Street show in Iran. We were transgendering mice for whatever reason. I have no idea why. But these are the things, that's actually very true. Just look it up. And they're very transparent about that. That's what they're doing. So that is absolutely ridiculous, and it must end. So it starts there. And my question to the Democrats this evening is, why are we so angry that DOGE is uncovering these things instead of the fact that what they're uncovering? You should be angry at the politicians that have allowed this. And while I am a Republican, I'm not going to get up here and say that it's just on the Democrats. Republicans, for far too long before Donald Trump, spend irresponsibly, as do the Democrats. Now, I think the Democrats are certainly worse at it, but the Republicans have also been guilty of it, and I will admit that. But the change of that starts now. It starts with admitting that we need to have a more efficient government, that we need to kill the bureaucracy. You know, last October, I came up here and said, death to bureaucracy. I believe that. It is the fourth branch of government, and it is currently harping your civil liberties, your civil rights, and it is costing us billions of dollars a year that we're losing that could benefit everyone in this audience. It's hurting the school children. It's hurting literally everyone in this room. So I urge you, take a moment to think about that this evening as we proceed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Hold it.
Yeah.
All right. Now, opening from the Dems.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for coming here today. I'd like to talk about the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. It's touted by leader Elon Musk, who's the world's richest man, as an initiative meant to combat waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. But DOGE only seems to do the opposite. Instead of promoting the reforms that are so badly needed for our own budget, it's endangering public health, causing chaos among federal agencies, and enabling corruption, all without even making a dent in federal spending. The biggest problem with DOGE is that it is an entirely undemocratic institution. It has always been the role of Congress to hold the power of the purse, and yet we now see that power being wielded by a single unelected billionaire. This concentration of power in a one person's hands is dangerous and unaccountable. Which brings me to my next point. DOGE is a notoriously opaque agency with no oversight, and its wall of receipts, which only show 30% of their total savings, by the way, which have been plagued with errors, exaggerations, and fabrications. Elon Musk having the power to regulate his own businesses is also an enormous conflict of interest, especially being the world's richest man. DOGE has also been a disaster for the public good. The Department of Health and Human Services, which has been the biggest source of cuts, has had huge parts of its budget just wiped away, meaning federal grants intended for disease prevention, vaccines, and cancer research are going unfunded. And on the topic of USAID, on this coming year, the cuts to USAID have been projected to cause about 180,000 additional preventable deaths from the world, mostly from disease. And this carries consequences for the American people as well. Disruptions caused by DOGE are making it harder for health agencies to monitor and control disease outbreaks worldwide, making America more vulnerable to disease and perhaps the next pandemic. Even President Trump's own allies have praised foreign aid and USAID. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, in fact, I believe in 2012, remarked that foreign aid is less than 1% of the budget, and yet it makes a disproportionate impact on U.S. influence worldwide. And he said, and I quote, "We should always search for ways to use U.S. aid to strengthen our influence abroad and the effectiveness of our own leadership." And ironically, despite being founded to ensure efficiency, DOGE itself is also very poorly run. Since its inception earlier this year, DOGE has been in a continuous cycle of mass firing of government officials, and upon realizing how critical those people are to running the country, hurriedly rehiring those laid-off workers. This pattern has repeated across agencies across the board and makes it almost completely unworkable being in a critical agency like the Social Security Administration, NIH, and the VA. In total, the Department of Government Efficiency is absolutely not serving this country's best interests. It's creating chaos in the federal government, reducing its capacity to deliver services to its citizens, and weakening the country internationally. It's chaotic, it's corrupt, and it's killing people.
All right, thank you. Now we will be moving on to 5 minutes of cross debate.
So, I want to start just to clarify something. Secretary Rubio has made very clear, now you're using some older quotes, that these essential services from USAID have been restructured under the State Department. So those aren't going away. So I think that's an important thing to look at first. And to another point, when we shake up the federal bureaucracy, it's going to cause chaos. Because for far too long, the bureaucracy itself has a radically left-wing bias. So of course they're going to be resistant to anything President Trump wants to do. And ultimately, in this case, it's cutting unessential workers. Yes, it's sad that people are losing their job, and I can sympathize with them. But it's absolutely ridiculous to think that if the government is still operating without them, why were they needed in the first place?
So on that point about, first of all, I wanted to talk about the transgender mice for a minute. This is a problem that I've noticed repeated a lot by supporters of DOGE, is that a lot of these studies are taken out of context. So the transgender mice you were discussing, that was a study meant to see like hormonal deficiencies in human beings. Injecting mice with hormones was meant to replicate a lot of the diseases. So just on that, besides that. So the federal bureaucracy is specifically a nonpartisan institution. The reason why it was even implemented in the first place
That's certainly not true.
Sorry,
But you can
speak.
continue.
So the reason why it was implemented in the first place was to stop the spoil system in which, say, the president would be appointing all the bureaucrats. How is putting in Elon Musk, a man appointed by Donald Trump, to restructure the government? That seems like a complete perversion of what the bureaucracy is all about. You're just taking one bias and replacing it with another, even stronger bias.
Well, I think that's absolutely ridiculous because it goes to show that we've had a bureaucracy for years that had a left-wing bias. They may say it's nonpartisan, but that's simply just not the case. Washington, D.C. is one of the most democratic places in the world, and that is where the bureaucracy itself is. That's where these people are coming from. They're moving to, and it just goes to show how radically left-wing the bureaucracy is. So that's absolutely just false to say that there is no bias. There is, and it's really put conservatives themselves out of power when they are in power, as we are right now. So I think that's just absolutely ridiculous to say.
Yeah, so that's the thing is I don't see how DOGE is going to help with this. I mean, you're taking a bureaucracy that maybe is more Democrat on average and replacing them with a man appointed by the president, for one thing. And another thing, he's appointing people from his own companies who are loyal exclusively to him, a bunch of 19-year-olds who have been previous Starlink, Tesla, etc. Interns. Mm-hmm. This does not seem to be helping. I don't see how your argument is relevant to what DOGE does.
Some of the most successful companies in our country, Tesla, Starlink, SpaceX, all doing fantastic things.
They have not been very successful recently.
I think it's to the testament. So anyway, just to the efficiency and the testament to their success, essentially, is what I wanted to point out there. But anyway, I think it's. We can go on about the bias and whatever, and there is a bias in the federal bureaucracy, and I think it's ridiculous. But what's also, I think, so ironic is the left loves to go on and on about Elon Musk. He's buying elections, all this other crap. But yet, you've had George Soros fund your party for years. He's literally bought elections, and no one ever sheds a light on that. It's only a problem when one of the most successful man ever to literally exist in the world comes out and is attempting to do some moral good for our country and make sure it's more efficient to make sure your tax dollars aren't wasted, that is a problem.
I'm wondering, has George Soros ever been appointed to a government position and given free reign in the federal government? Because he hasn't. Him and Elon Musk are on the same level playing field here. They're both donors to political campaigns. That's what George Soros does. That's what Elon Musk did, except in Elon Musk's case, he was rewarded with a government position created exclusively for him. That is the difference between them.
But anyway, they have been incredibly successful in cutting that. There's no point to respond to there. Everyone knows about George Soros, whatever. But anyway, I just think, I just think it's absolutely ridiculous to think about that. When we, whatever. Anyway.
Whatever, indeed.
Yes. However, I want to talk about the success of DOGE. You know, one of the things they started with was federal buyouts. Over 75,000 federal employees left. That itself shrank the bureaucracy, willingly. They weren't fired, they willingly took the buyout. And we've also, in the midst of that, we've discovered things like unemployment benefits that were paid to individuals that were born in 2154, which is true, I verified that before, who received $41,000. And in fact, toddlers, age 1 to 5, collectively received $254 million in unemployment benefits. Why? Where are these toddlers, super toddlers? Maybe we should get them in DOGE, because I think they're obviously very great if they're getting $254 million in unemployment benefits. So I think it's just the absolute ridiculousness of DOGE. And, you know, really the American people are on our side on this. You know, this is like an 80-20 issue at this point.
Thank you. We'll now be moving on to the rebuttal speeches, first starting with Republicans.
You know, my opponent has, you know, tried to claim that the bureaucracy itself has no bias, that, you know, Elon Musk is wrongfully in power, and that's completely false. I said the bureaucracy has a left-wing bias. It has forever. It's cheapened the education of our children. It's indoctrinated them. And it's quite literally wasted our tax dollars. We lose billions of dollars a year to the bureaucracy, when instead we could make this more efficient by simply block granting the funding that we're giving to the bureaucracy to the state to have them determine, as the 10th Amendment would support, which is why I'm fully in support of dismantling the Department of Education, removing USAID, because things like that need to happen. Our children have not gotten more successful under the Department of Education, which is a big thing that's been a hot topic of contention recently. And, you know, our children literally cannot read. 75% of them in 8th grade are literally unable to read at proficient levels. 72% are inefficient, non-proficient in math. And I think that's just a testament of how much the bureaucracy has failed them. The bureaucracy does not even educate kids. We spend $80 billion a year on the Department of Education, and yet it's doing no good in that sense. It's literally just hindering them and removing parents entirely from the conversation, and I just think that's totally immoral and awful. And that's what we need to really draw the focus on. The DOGE has made efforts to dismantle the Department of Education and return it to the states where it rightfully belongs, which I think where we need to take that conversation.
So I'm really interested in your argument about tax dollars. So I'd like to talk for a second about one agency that has failed, I think, 7 consecutive audits over the past few years and has trillions of dollars unaccounted for, and that is the military budget. Do you know how big the military budget is? Hang on. Please. Do you know how big the military budget is compared to the Department of Education and USAID? Not even a drop in the bucket for USAID and the Department of Education. And yet, DOGE has practically not touched the military budget. In fact, we have seen the first ever $1 trillion budget announced for the military. I'm just frankly confused by your argument here, because if you're talking about wasted tax dollars, that's just the low-hanging fruit. I mean, they don't even know how much money is in the Department of Defense.
I mean, the Pentagon has been failing.
We are in rebuttal, so it'll just be one speaker.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay. Right, so I also wanted to talk about the Department of Education. So you mentioned that you suggest that cutting funds for the Department of Education would somehow make it better, because the reason why education is doing so poorly in the US is because it is underfunded, not because it is more funded. Taking away money is not going to help. All that will mean is less money for schools, and especially, you're Republican, red states are going to be disproportionately impacted by this. Federal dollars go disproportionately towards red states. California, for example, loses, I think, about $80 billion a year to the federal government. So cutting education at the federal level would not affect our state that much, but it would affect Kansas, Nebraska, Louisiana, Alabama enormously.
Okay. Thank you. Now we will move on to the moderated question.
All right. So again, question is for both of you guys. We'll start with GOP response. So many audience members are worried about a sort of dilemma we seem to be in. There has been rare bipartisan agreement that there is bureaucratic waste. And President Trump has enacted one of the largest initiatives to tackle it that we've seen in recent history. But in doing so, a myriad of constitutional norms might have been pushed aside, and power has increasingly been centralized in the executive. So our question is, how do we balance our need to tackle government inefficiency while also sticking to constitutional norms and government processes?
Well, it kind of starts with where we started. We have to start somewhere. You know, my opponent earlier kind of talked about USAID being only 1% of the budget. And I'm going to use this phrase. That itself is low-hanging fruit because that's clear waste. So I wanted to start there. And then also just to address your point on the military budget as well, President Trump has made a commitment to cut that by 8%, and Secretary Higgs said
He's committed to raise it to $1 trillion.
Please do not interrupt the
No,
speaker.
yeah. That's not true. You can verify the 8%. Anyway, also Secretary Higgs wants to make sure the Pentagon can pass an audit, and it's been very clear under the Biden administration too that it has failed audit after audit. But anyway, to get on the constitutionality of it, we had to start somewhere. We had to start with the low-hanging fruit. It started by forming DOGE to bring light to the fact that there is bureaucratic waste, which both parties have talked about for a very long time, which is why this is an 80-20 issue, why many, many, many people support the work that DOGE is doing. But we also can eventually facilitate that work with Congress to make sure that all ethical and constitutional bounds are met.
Thank you. Your 1-minute statement.
This is answering the same question? Yeah. Okay. So I'd like to talk about DOGE specifically, not so much with regards to the Constitution, because it is absolutely unconstitutional. So many of its proceedings have been held up in court. But I would like to talk about DOGE just simply not being that effective. It claims to have cut $150 billion so far. But the issue is that the vouchers, the receipts that DOGE uses, those, for one thing, those only cover about 30% of the actual total that they say. So that means that 70% of that total is completely unable to verify. And then another thing, those receipts have been plagued by errors all the time. So a really excellent example was actually the biggest contract cut that DOGE reported for weeks, I think it was until early April when they fixed this, was an $8 billion cut to, I believe it was a DEI program for Department of Homeland Security. It was actually $8 million. And they had kept that error there for weeks. And every time they update the database, new updates, new mistakes are simply added every time.
Thank you. Now we will be moving to a 2-minute crossfire where both debaters can speak.
You know, I would start with the fact that, okay, the people that are running the department itself are human. An error or two may happen. Fine. But it also does not necessarily talk to the efficiency of it. We have to make sure, we have to start somewhere. And entirely saying and shutting down the conversation by saying, hey, one person made one error, is just ridiculous. Instead of being angry about what's actually being found that is itself verifiable, you know, coming in with things, you know, like I'd mentioned earlier, it's absolutely ridiculous to look at that and say that, oh, we should just continue on as it is. It's a bipartisan issue to want to cut waste, and DOGE has to start, they have to start somewhere, we have to start somewhere, and it's the Republicans themselves, after the Democrats have been saying for years that they were going to do it, that brought light to the issue and the waste of the federal bureaucracy itself.
I would like to add that the way we are starting now, if that's is a starting point, is a terrible starting point for us. So for one thing, the staff is completely incompetent. A good example, Edward Korstein, he's a 19-year-old DOGE staffer who I believe was a Neuralink intern who was previously fired from a cybersecurity job for leaking info to a competitor. He now has upper-tier access to almost the entire, I think the IRS, the SSA, and a bunch of other agencies' databases detailing social security numbers and a lot of extremely sensitive information about citizens. So he's only just one example of all of the staff that Elon Musk has hired, most of whom are from his companies, and none of whom have any government experience. So if that is the starting point, it is not doing very well so far.
I think it's awful laughable when we talk about people not having government experience. I don't want someone with government experience. The federal government itself has got us $34 trillion in debt. Do you not realize that? These people are freaking dumb to literally going to bankrupt the country if we don't do something. So respectfully, I don't give a damn if they came from anywhere other if the federal government. I hope they didn't.
These staffers are objectively doing a terrible job. I think 10 to 20%.
They're cutting over $1 billion a day.
Of all the staffers that they fire are rehired again.
All right, thank you, debaters, for that crossfire. We will now be moving to closing statements, starting with Republicans.
Sorry, that got tense. It was getting boring up here, and I really had to spice that up. Anyway, you know, because there's, you know, really, I wanted to go back to the Department of Education conversation, because that's actually an area I'm passionate about that we need to cut, because that's the clear waste. It really is. Because it's not raise our test scores. I mean, we can laugh all we want. You really can. But there's no reason to. And we spend $80 billion a year on them. And literally, we're getting nothing for it. Our children literally can't read. And, my opponent's going to be like, well, trust the experts on the Department of Education. The experts have literally got us $34 trillion in debt. Our kids can't read, and apparently men can get pregnant, which I think is just absolutely ridiculous. So we need to really address that. We have serious problems in our country, and it really starts with the federal bureaucracy. We have to shrink the size of it. And DOGE, whatever my opponent wants to say, is a starting point. It's not the end point. I said, we have 4 years left of this administration. I said, you know what? And if we come back and it's an utter failure, I'll be the first to tell you. I was a Trump skeptic myself. But when he's successful, I'm going to point that out. And that's been the case. DOGE is cutting, verifiably, $1 billion a day. And that is a starting point. We have to start somewhere. Secretary Hegseth made a commitment to ensuring that the Pentagon itself can pass an audit. Hold him accountable to that. We should all be holding our people accountable, as I do as a Republican. So I certainly hope we do, because this has been a concern for me as well. And it is not partisanship that got us into this. It is ridiculous spending, and we need to make sure that we address it. And DOGE is the starting point for doing that. Eventually, we work for Congress, we pass a better budget, not just CRs, and ensure that we do that. But it starts there. So my opponent can say whatever. The Department of Education, it's a failure. USAID, absolutely ridiculous, and the essential stuff's been restructured into the State Department, and we're ensuring that the federal bureaucracy is not wasting any more of our tax dollars, which is what we're working towards over the next 4 years. Because it's entirely wasted too much. And everyone in here should be angry about that as we go to file our taxes here today, or already did, I hope.
Thank you. And the final closing statement from Dems?
Yeah, so in, I believe, the year 2000, the U.S. federal deficit was actually, there was no deficit, it was actually a surplus. The federal deficit began to grow to the rate that it is between the years 2001 and 2003. You all might be familiar with what happened around then and what changes to the budget occurred then. What I'm saying is that was the defense budget ballooning to an absurd size, and that is what started our current problem with the deficit. Besides that, overall, DOGE has threatened to leave a legacy. Trash piling up in national parks, hospitals across rural America underfunded, U.S. influence abroad just wiped out, and our population left vulnerable to another pandemic, all with next to no impact on the national deficit. In fact, our U.S. spending has grown about 6% just in this administration alone. Is this the kind of legacy that we want to leave? If making the government more efficient is the goal, DOGE is not the answer. Replacing bureaucrats with unqualified 19-year-old interns is not the answer. Replacing, everything that is doing well with the government and cutting it out and replacing it with nothing it's not the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give it up for Dakota and River on DOGE.
Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We have officially concluded our Spring 2025 debate. Please give a round of applause to all of our amazing debaters for their thoughtful participation and their commitment to fostering bipartisan discourse here at USC. On behalf of the USC Political Student Assembly, I'd also like to extend a special thank you to our co-hosts, USC Political Union, CPF, Trojan Debate Society, Trojan Democrats, USC College Republicans, and of course, our amazing PSA e-board who made this all possible. And finally, to our audience, thank you all so much for coming and contributing to an atmosphere of respect, tolerance, and open dialogue. And we all hope that you learned something.
If you enjoyed tonight, please be sure to join us again this Thursday for an AAN HPI in Power panel to discuss the evolving role of Asian Americans in politics. Also, check out our Instagram story to fill out the USG Campus Access Survey. Is there food left? There might be food left over, so take some on your way out.